I never thought my own family would turn me into a stranger in my own home. I was just 16 when my world collapsed, when my father looked me in the eyes and told me to leave, all because of something I didn't do. One lie, one poisonous whisper from the woman he called his wife, and suddenly, I became the villain in a story I never wrote. That night, I stood outside with a single suitcase, watching the door slam shut behind me, realizing that love could vanish faster than trust. I had no one, no plan, no safety. But deep inside, something broke, and something else was born. Years passed. I built myself from the ashes he left me in. I worked, fought, and survived while they lived comfortably off the lies that destroyed me. I told myself I was over it until one day, my father showed up at my door. The same man who threw me out was now begging for a place to stay, for my sister. And in that moment, I realized, life doesn't forget. It just waits. But what do you do when karma finally knocks, disguised as the man who once abandoned you? I used to believe our home was unbreakable. A small, sunlit house at the edge of town where my dad's laughter filled every corner and my world revolved around his approval.
It was just the two of us for years after Mom passed.
I became his little shadow, helping him cook, waiting by the window for him to come home from work, memorizing every smile as if it were proof that I still mattered in a world that had already taken too much from me. Then she arrived. My stepmom. The woman who smiled like she'd been born to fit into our lives. I remember the first day she walked into our home. Her perfume was sweet, her words even sweeter. Dad said she'd make us a family again. And for a while, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe we could fill the silence that grief left behind. But little by little, things began to change. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers behind closed doors. I'd catch her looking at me with a softness that never reached her eyes, as if I were something inconvenient, something she needed to erase. Still, I tried. I helped her in the kitchen, complimented her cooking, and called her mom when Dad was around. I thought if I just tried hard enough, she'd learn to love me too. But love wasn't what she wanted. Control was. At school, I worked hard, dreaming of college and a life that would make Dad proud. Every test, every grade, every effort, I did it for him. I thought if he saw how much I cared, he'd never believe anything bad about me. But I underestimated how powerful lies can be when they come from someone you trust. It started small. She'd forget to tell me about dinner plans, then tell Dad I didn't want to join. She'd move things around the house, then claim I'd lost them. Tiny things, harmless on their own, but they planted seeds of doubt. I saw it in his eyes. Confusion, hesitation, then distance. I'd come home and find them talking quietly, her hand on his arm, his brow furrowed. When I walked in, the conversation would stop, replaced with awkward silence. I told myself it was nothing, that he loved me too much to believe any of it. But I was wrong. One evening, I overheard her whisper something I'll never forget. Her voice, smooth as honey, sang, "She's out of control, David. I'm scared of what she might do next." I froze. Scared of me? I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run into the room and defend myself, but fear glued my feet to the floor. From that moment, everything shifted.
Dad stopped looking at me the same way.
His tone grew colder. His patience is shorter. I'd walk past his door and hear her crying softly, fake tears that twisted the knife even deeper. Then came the night that changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but the life I'd built, the trust I'd protected, was about to collapse under the weight of her lies. Looking back now, I see all the signs I ignored, the way she studied me, tested my boundaries, and smiled every time Dad scolded me. I was too young to understand the game she was playing, too naive to realize she wasn't trying to be part of the family. She was trying to erase me from it. And she succeeded. But what she didn't know was that the girl she broke would one day come back stronger, strong enough to face them both. The first full, honest picture of what they had done didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in shards, small, sharp things that cut through the life I thought I knew until I could see the whole pattern. It began with the misplaced things, the missing homework, the changed plans. It moved to notes left where they wouldn't be found, then to a message I wasn't supposed to see. A short, careful note on my father's phone that made my blood run cold. The words weren't loud, but the meaning echoed. She had been shaping my life into a story where I was the problem and she was the victim. The truth felt like a betrayal so precise it had been engineered. Once the pattern revealed itself, betrayal stopped being an idea and became an enemy I could name. I started collecting proofs with a kind of quiet fury, receipts that contradicted her stories, timelines that proved her convenient forgetfulness, little inconsistencies that, when strung together, formed a rope strong enough to hang the whole lie. I was meticulous because I had nothing left to lose, except the only home I had ever known. Each discovery was a cold, concentrated burn in my chest. Each one hardened me further. I refused to beg for the clarity I deserved. Instead, I built a file box of the truth I would one day show. Confrontation came not as a storm but as a calculated moment, because storms speak and I needed silence to move. I did not shout. I did not plead. I showed the proof in a way that left no room for his doubt. Dates, messages, small things that could not be dismissed as youthful rebellion. Even so, it did not go the way I imagined. The man who had taught me how to tie my shoes, who had kissed my forehead when fever flared, who had promised he would always be my shelter, turned away from the documents as if they were insects to be brushed from his sleeve. He chose an easier story, a version that preserved his image and the comfort she offered him, over the daughter who had grown up in his house. The dismissal happened in a single, brutal moment. There was no dramatic speech, no righteous apology. There was only a short, cold decision that carved my life in two. I left with a bag and a stare that felt heavier than any suitcase. I remember standing on the porch as the door closed, the sound final and ordinary at once. Neighbors' lights blurred into one another. Somewhere down the street a radio played a song that used to make me dance. Those ordinary sounds mocked the extraordinary rupture inside me. For months after, grief was a practical thing. It arrived in broken routines, and in the way my phone no longer vibrated with messages from home. It arrived as hours of staring at the ceiling, imagining all the conversations that could have been honest if only someone had chosen truth. But grief, even raw and skeletal, does not keep one alive. Anger does. That quiet, burning rage that had started as a reflex became a constant engine that pushed me forward. I learned fast how to survive. Work became less about passion and more about ballast. I took jobs that taught me skills and paid rent, odd shifts, long days, small victories. I learned to sleep in places that weren't mine and to make a pantry out of very little. Pride was a shape I had to remold. Vulnerability became a tool rather than a weakness. I cultivated discipline like armor. Savings hidden under false names, applications filled out late into the night, interviews where I sold competence because nobody needed to know about the nights I cried into my sweater. And while I rebuilt, the memory of their faces at the moment of my expulsion became a compass. Each time temptation whispered to give up, I replayed their indifference until it stung fresh. My stepmother's smile, calibrated to win sympathy, and my father's distracted, protective silence. Those images tracked me through cheap apartments, through jobs that paid in experience rather than money, through friendships that were tests and then anchors. Survival hardened into a quiet hunger, not merely to stay alive, but to become someone who could never again be shoved into the shadows. There were betrayals that left physical marks, hours without food, nights spent waiting for the bus in winter wind, but the worst wounds were invisible. Trust had a new price tag, a ledger of ways I would not allow myself to be vulnerable again. I learned to read people like maps, to find the places where they might twist the truth. The skill of spotting deceit felt like medicine. It fed the plan that slowly took shape in the hollow grief left by their choice. I didn't rush into revenge. Revenge is not a rash action but a long construction. It requires patience, time, and above all, an accurate assessment of the opponent. I spent years studying them from a distance, their habits, their weaknesses, the soft points where vanity or comfort made them predictable. I watched the way my stepmother spent money, the friends she cultivated, the causes she championed, small clues that revealed larger patterns. I tracked my father's routines, the thrift with which he managed the house, the way he sought approval, and I cataloged how those patterns might be used against them. Opportunity arrived disguised as necessity. A job that required long hours in town turned into a career that made me visible, not to them, but to the world. I learned how to manage money, how to negotiate, how to speak with authority in rooms where I had once been ignored. Each new skill was a tool in the quiet plan growing inside me. I did not crave revenge for its own sake. I craved justice, the kind that leaves the guilty with the knowledge that their choices had consequences. I wanted them to feel, for a flicker, the vulnerability they had given me. There were nights when doubt crept in, when the weight of doing everything alone threatened to flatten me. I considered rage without direction and almost let it consume me. But in those dark hours, I found ways to channel it. Late-night classes, small investments, calls to people who could help, even the careful acquisition of legal knowledge. I built a life not merely to spite them, but to be unassailable. If they thought they had erased me, I resolved to show them how wrong they were by becoming someone who could offer shelter and then choose whether to open the door. I moved through the years with a secret steadiness. I sent money anonymously for repairs they needed, only to make sure they never knew it came from me. I silenced my pride when necessary and let other victories accumulate quietly. There were moments of petty satisfaction, watching them squabble over something trivial, imagining the fissures that made their united front fragile, but I never let these satisfy me completely. Petty triumphs are small comforts at best. I wanted an outcome that altered the ledger, a reckoning measured not in spite, but in rightful consequence. Then came the day when past and present collided. Years of steady, hidden work had led to a home I could call my own, a place bought with careful planning and sleepless months. It was not a grand mansion, but it was mine, a doorway that closed on the world under my terms. I had learned how to make stability, and with it, authority. The house was a punctuation mark in a sentence that had once been left unfinished. Owning it felt like proof that I had not only survived but had crafted a life from the wreckage they had left behind. The knock on the door came in the late afternoon, when sunlight sat low and honest across the hallway floor. At first, it was the kind of sound a homeowner barely registers, a polite interruption to an ordinary day. Then I heard the shuffle, the hesitation in footsteps I vaguely recognized, and the relief that came in a voice I had not expected to hear for years. The past had shown up at my threshold, and with it the question I had avoided asking myself aloud. What would I do when the people who had taught me abandonment returned seeking shelter? I stood very still, palms pressed against the cool wood of the banister, feeling the moment stretch taut. All the evidence I had gathered, all the plans I had made, condensed into a single point of decision. The answer would not be obvious, and the choice would be heavier than any suitcase I had once carried. Outside the door, there was a knock again, more insistent, pleading perhaps, and my breath caught. This is where the story pauses, the split second before a choice becomes action. The next move would change everything. Would I open the door the way I once had, or would I let the years of quiet work decide for me? When I finally opened the door, time stopped. He stood there, older, smaller somehow, his shoulders no longer square but weighed down by guilt. His eyes searched my face like he was looking for a memory he'd lost. And behind him, clinging to his arm, was my sister, the child they'd built their perfect family around after throwing me away. Her expression was timid, uncertain, almost apologetic. "Please," he said, voice trembling. We have nowhere else to go." The words hit me like ice water.
We.
The same word he'd used years ago when he said, "We can't have you here anymore. Now that we want my help." He didn't know that I already knew everything. I had followed their life from a distance. My stepmother's slow decline, the financial ruin she'd hidden, the mortgage she'd lost, and finally, her disappearance when debts came knocking. They had lost the very house they'd stolen from me, the one I used to call home. Now karma has done what I never could. I stepped aside and let them in. Not out of mercy, out of strategy. The air in the room was thick with silence. I watched him look around the life I'd built. The warm lights, the shelves lined with books, the framed degrees on the wall. All the things he'd said I'd never achieve without him. My sister's eyes darted between us, sensing the tension, but not understanding its roots. He started to explain, his voice breaking, telling me how his wife had left him, how he'd tried to fix everything but failed, how he only wanted a safe place for his youngest daughter until things improved. I listened quietly. Every word scraped at old wounds. He spoke as if we were strangers sharing polite tragedy, not the wreckage of betrayal. When he finished, he looked at me with that same pleading expression from years ago, the one I used to crumble under. But this time I didn't. I remember the night you told me to leave, I said softly. Do you? His eyes dropped to the floor. I made mistakes. No, I said, my voice sharpening. You made a choice. I could see it then, the dawning realization that I wasn't the frightened girl anymore. The silence between us stretched thin, charged with everything unsaid. That night, I let them stay. I offered my sister the guest room and my father the couch. But what I didn't offer was forgiveness. I wanted him to see what it felt like to depend on someone who could turn cold at any moment. I wanted him to taste the fear of uncertainty he once fed me. In the following days, he tried to act grateful, helpful, even cooking, cleaning, pretending we were rebuilding something. But guilt doesn't wash away so easily. Every time I walked past him, I saw it in his face, the discomfort, the silent question of when the punishment would come. And I made sure he felt it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply made him live in the quiet reflection of his own decisions. When bills arrived, I'd leave them open on the counter so he'd see the cost of the roof over his head. When he offered to pay, I'd smile and say, "Don't worry, I remember what it's like to have nothing." Each word was a scalpel, precise and deliberate. One evening, I returned home to find him standing in the living room, holding one of my framed photos, the day I graduated college. His hands shook. "You did it all without me," he whispered.
No, I said.
"I did it because of you." He looked at me, eyes glistening, searching for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe the daughter he'd thrown away. But I had nothing left to give him except truth. "I used to wonder what was wrong with me," I continued. "Why did you believe her lies? Why do you let her ruin everything?" And then I realized it wasn't me who was broken. It was you. He tried to speak, but I stopped him. "You wanted a home for your daughter? You have it.
For now.
But this is not family. This is what you made." The next morning, I left early and went to work. When I came back, the couch was empty. He'd packed up and left quietly, leaving a note that said, "I'm sorry for everything. I don't deserve your kindness." I stared at it for a long time. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe even triumph. But what I felt was power, the calm kind that comes from finally reclaiming your story. Weeks passed. I learned through a neighbor that he'd found a small apartment in a rundown part of town. My sister stayed in touch, shyly calling me once in a while, grateful for the time I'd given them. And I, for the first time in years, slept peacefully. People say revenge is about making others pay. But the truth is, the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's living a life so full and unshakable that they can never undo it. I didn't ruin him. Life already had. I just stood there to witness it, to let him know that the girl he'd abandoned had turned into a woman who needed nothing from him anymore. Still, sometimes late at night, I think about that door, the one that closed on me when I was 16, and the one I opened years later. I wonder which version of me he saw when I opened it, the wounded child or the woman who refused to break. Maybe both. Because true revenge isn't fire and fury, it's the quiet moment when they realize you survived everything they thought would destroy you. And that's exactly what I did. When the sirens faded and the crowd dispersed, silence finally claimed the night. I stood there, alone, but not broken. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest had lifted. I'd done it. I'd exposed them, every lie, every manipulation, every cruel word they'd buried me under. My stepmother's empire of deceit had crumbled right before her eyes, and my father, He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. But that look, it didn't bring joy. It brought something else. Something hollow. Because as much as I'd wanted his apology, his regret, I realized I didn't need it anymore. When I walked away from that house, the same one he'd thrown me out of years ago, it didn't feel like leaving. It felt like shedding. Every step I took down that long driveway was a goodbye to the girl who once begged to be believed. The next few days were a blur. News spread like wildfire, people whispering, recording, sharing. The story had taken on a life of its own. My stepmother's reputation disintegrated online. Her business partners cut ties. My father tried to stay quiet, but guilt has a way of being louder than words. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I just watched. Because revenge isn't about applause. It's about closure. But closure doesn't come cleanly. It comes in fragments, in moments when you realize victory feels a little emptier than you imagined. The morning after, I found myself sitting by the window of my new place. Sunlight poured through the glass, warm and indifferent. I stared at the reflection staring back at me. There was peace there, yes, but also a shadow. I'd taken back my power, but a piece of me had burned in the process. That's the truth people don't tell you about revenge. It doesn't end with the downfall of your enemy. It ends when you stop needing their pain to validate your own. Weeks later, I got a letter. From my dad. Just a few lines, written shakily. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. I finally see what she cost us. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not because I hated him, but because I'd finally stopped living in the echo of his choices. I'd built something new, something mine. Every scar, every betrayal, had led me here. To this strength. To this silence that didn't hurt anymore. Sometimes when I walk past that old neighborhood, I still see their house. The windows are dark now, the laughter gone. I don't feel satisfaction, just a strange calm. Maybe that's what healing really is, when the memories stop screaming and start whispering instead. But there's something else I learned in all this. Something I wish I could tell every person who's ever been lied to, abandoned, or broken by the people they loved most. Revenge will make you feel powerful, but forgiveness will make you free. And freedom? It's not forgetting what they did. It's remembering, and still choosing to live anyway. I used to think revenge was my victory. Now I see it was my awakening. Because once you've been through hell, the fire no longer scares you. It shapes you. And when people see your scars, they don't see weakness. They see survival. So yes, I got my revenge. The truth came out. The lies fell apart. And I walked away not as a victim, but as someone reborn through her own rage. But I also learned something else. Revenge might give you justice, but it won't give you peace. Peace is something you build when you stop fighting ghosts. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered why your pain had to be your story, remember this. Pain is temporary.
But your strength?
That's eternal. Don't waste your life proving your worth to people too blind to see it. Let your silence be the loudest thing they hear. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's evolution. And maybe that's what I did. I evolved. I'm no longer the girl who cried in her room, waiting for someone to choose her truth over a lie. I'm the woman who built her own truth and let it shine so bright that the lies couldn't survive in its light. My father may never earn my forgiveness. My stepmother will live forever with the ruin she created.
But me?
I'll live freely, with nothing left to prove. Because revenge gave me justice, but self-worth gave me power. And maybe that's what this whole story was really about. Not revenge, not betrayal, but rebirth. We all crave that one moment when the world finally sees what we've endured. But sometimes, the real victory isn't when they see it, it's when we no longer need them to. So now I'll ask you, just like I asked myself that night when the fire in me finally went quiet, what would you do if your pain had a voice? Would you use it to destroy or to rebuild? Because in the end, revenge might start your story. But forgiveness, the quiet kind, the one you give yourself, that's what ends it. If you've ever been broken and found the courage to rise again, share your story below. Someone out there needs to hear it. Because revenge may satisfy the wound, but your healing might just inspire the world.